So welcome everyone. I'm Leah DeForest, the Communications Manager with Texas Digital Library. We are really excited to have you here today for the faculty edition of Intro to Pressbooks. And our webinar today is going to be led by Liz Mays. She's the Director of Sales and Marketing with Pressbooks, and she's going to walk us through how faculty might go about using Pressbooks to create, adapt, adopt, reuse, etc., their own OER materials. And with that, I'm going to mute myself, and I believe Liz has muted all the rest of the participants. You're welcome to use chat to type in your questions, and I will keep an eye on that for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction, Leah. And I'm super excited to be here. I'm Liz Mays. I'm with Pressbooks. I am also a faculty adjunct at Arizona State University and previously was an administrator at Arizona State University. So I do have some experience as a faculty member using Pressbooks for OER materials, and I'm excited to show you how you might use it yourself. So the first thing that I might show is, for context, Pressbooks is a platform that can allow you to create well-formatted book-like content in a variety of export formats, and also to extend the definition of what a book can be on the web. We have a product. There are many ways to use Pressbooks. Pressbooks EDU is a version of our platform that includes a number of educational features that universities tend to want, as well as training and support. And that is primarily what I'll be demonstrating here today. Right now, the one concept I want to orient everyone to is the concept of a web book. So one of the things we want to do when we're creating open educational resources is to essentially make the book free to students. That is like the number one thing we want to achieve. We're wanting to make it free to them in the digital formats that do not cost money to produce. So here is one example of a web book built on a Pressbooks network. This is one where I was the co-editor on this book, and this was a collaboratively built open textbook with, I believe, it must have been 25 or more different contributors that came together and wrote different parts and chapters of this modular open textbook. And the end result is this place where all of those using this textbook across North America can send their students, and they can send them to individual chapters of the book, or they can send them to, the whole URL for the entire book, and students can navigate the table of contents however they might choose. They can click on it from the webbook homepage, they can go forward and back. There's a table of contents here that they could, click into whatever they might want. And the other piece of this that's exciting, though, is that all of those students can also download the book in a variety of export formats. And here we've only enabled just a few of the formats that are available, but I'll show you what this looks like with all of those export formats enabled. This is yet another webbook built on Pressbooks. And you can see that you could send students to a link and say, you may not be able to read this book on your cell phone today. You might be in an airplane. You might be traveling in a rural area, but why don't you download, for instance, a PDF format for offline reading if you wanted one? Or maybe you're wanting to print off a chapter to, just highlight it or something. Go ahead and do that with one of these formats. This also enables essentially other people to take, for instance, the Thin Common cartridge export with web links and load that into their learning management system and sort of use it as the spine of the course. That's not the full LTI integration, but it's one way to structure your course and put activities around a book in a different environment. So another piece of context, because I did see we had some administrators on the call as well, when you have a Pressbooks EDU network, it is your institution's network. So for instance, this is Berkeley's network, and you can see that they have their logo, their colors. They've put up a custom background image. They are using it, the blocks on the homepage in a certain way. A similar example would be University of Saskatchewan, and you can see that while similar, their network looks slightly different with their branding, and then they're utilizing the catalog fairly robustly. So when you're building a book on Pressbooks, you can do it privately, or you can make the book public, or you can make the book public and also point to it from the institution's catalog. And so this institution happens to be pointing to a number of the public books on its network that it has really assisted in development. Here is just a selection of different books that they have done here. I have a couple examples just to kind of give you an idea of cool things that have been built on Pressbooks. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with Robin DeRosa's Open Anthology of Earlier American Literature. This is a book that could be used to replace, for instance, the Norton Anthology. It is also an example of open pedagogy in which she worked with her students to develop this resource for future classes. There is also now a remix of this made by Timothy Robbins and his students, and this one incorporates a number of different texts than the original. And there's actually been another remix that I know of this book as well. And then a similar project is this anthology of Hispanic literature, also an open pedagogy classroom project in which the students wrote critical introductions to literature texts of Hispanic literature. And of course, Google is going to translate this for me now, but this is in Spanish. You can do books in other languages on Pressbooks as well. It won't write the other language for you, but it will support you using a variety of different languages. Some college success books. This is one very frequent use of Pressbooks to develop those university success manuals. Here is one such book. Here is another on University of Texas at Arlington's network. I think this is a great example of the types of materials that could be done on Pressbooks. Another one that's fairly well known is Dave Dillon's Blueprint for Success in College and Career. He has several volumes of this that are built on Pressbooks. And what's great about Pressbooks is if you as a university or department want to take and adapt some of these materials that are openly licensed, you're very easily able to get them into a remixable, editable format. Some other cool things, I'll just show a smattering really quick. There was a recent project done in a classroom about the Year of the Woman in Politics in 2018. I thought that was a cool project coming out of Muhlenberg. There is also an intro to women, gender, and sexuality studies from University of Massachusetts Amherst. There are some wonderful language textbooks. Here is a Portuguese textbook, which I'll show you a little from in a moment. Muhlenberg also just released 2 Italian textbooks. So lots has been built, and these are just examples that I found particularly compelling. There are more than 60 Pressbooks networks out there. A lot of these materials can be found in different libraries, but they're fun and they're interesting. Other popular books in different disciplines, web literacy for student fact checkers. I'm sure you've seen this on Twitter. Very good for digital literacy classes. History books, science books, medicine books, nursing books. We've seen a lot of things. This is a Bill of Rights primer that is used in one professor's courses at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Here is a textbook on the Middle East that is coming out of Ohio State. So just a lot of different interesting materials and possibilities for what you could do on Pressbooks. One thing I'll show you, and one of the reasons I think Pressbooks is so popular for these books is the ability to extend what the definition of a book is. This is that Portuguese textbook. Again, one thing that you can do in Pressbooks is you can upload things like multimedia or embed multimedia. In this case, they have an audio file inside the book where you can listen to a dialogue. They then have a transcript of the dialogue so you can read along. And then they've utilized the H5P tool that is in Pressbooks EDU to have the students test their understanding of what they just heard and read. So now I could, if I were a student, answer some interactive questions about what I just heard. So here, and hopefully I shall become better at this, I could mark the conjugated forms of a certain verb, and I could see if I did that right. I did not. I could even show the solution and then, okay, maybe I will do this better next time and I can retry this. So that's a nice way to incorporate multimedia. Another example of this, the capabilities of Pressbooks, is a tool called Hypothesis that is available for you. You don't have to use this. It's a per book decision, so everyone making a book can make their own decision. But this is a nice way to make your book a conversation. And that could be a conversation with the public. It could be a conversation with your students. It could be a conversation with your students from one semester. It could be a conversation between the students and the authors, or between you and the author, and you adding context, a layer of context to a book that you've assigned to your students. This is just an example of one book that has this enabled, and you can see there are annotations that I could read or engage with in the margins. I could also, on hypothesis, set up private group layers for a particular class of students, or a particular semester's class of students, or a peer review scenario, lots of other ways to do this. So that is one nice capability. You can also do things like glossary terms and auto-populated glossaries. If you are working in STEM, you might enjoy embedding things like PhET simulations, chemistry, physics, that type of a thing. You can embed things like videos from YouTube or Vimeo, other sources that are typical. There's a thing created out of the Night Lab called the Timeline.js. That is something that you can also just include a link to, and it will embed into the book. So for instance, this is a timeline of a certain poet. You could have this chapter be a biography of that poet, and then in the middle somewhere you could include this timeline that students could then navigate as they wish. You can also embed story maps. I learned this week, though I don't have an example of that. I believe those are also coming out of the Night Lab. You can do things like text boxes very easily without doing any coding of your own. You could use these for learning objectives or takeaways at the end of the chapter, different things to highlight for your students, for instance. You can even make some relatively sophisticated tables without coding, and I should get to an example of that here. We have a plugin that makes this inside Pressbooks EDU that makes this a little easier. We also have, for people who are doing math equations a lot, Pressbooks typically supports the preferred syntaxes, one of which many faculty have told us they prefer MathJax to create their equations for a variety of reasons, and so we do support MathJax. You can do a variety of very cool things, including render this in a different format. You can zoom on hover, you can do a lot of different things. You can change the language, so that is a popular feature as well. But so now that I've given you a bit of just an overview of what Pressbooks is and what you can do with it, I'm going to give you a couple examples of hopefully a little bit of training on how to actually use it. So the first thing I'm going to demonstrate is actually cloning. And there are a number of places where, a typical scenario that I hear of is a professor who would want to use something that is OER, but needs to make some changes to it before it could be usable in their classroom. So a couple places that you might find books built on Pressbooks include the Open Textbook Network Library. For instance, this is sorted by categories. I happen to know that there are a number of books built on Pressbooks here. This one is not, this one is, this one is not, this one is, this one is, Pressbooks, 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 not Pressbooks, 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 not Pressbooks, Pressbooks, Pressbooks. So lots of places where you're likely to find many copies of Pressbooks books. In fact, BC Campus, who you may be familiar with, they have recently taken 33 of the very popular OpenStax open textbooks, which are for high enrollment core courses, and they have put them into Pressbooks on their network, and you can search for them in their library. So one that I know that is here is psychology, so I will search for that. Okay, and this is the OpenStax edition. So if I go to their library and I click on the editable version, it will take me to the Pressbooks website. And then all I'm going to need to make an editable version of this is this URL. So going into, this is just a demo network of Pressbooks. I'm going to clone a book, and that is I think a very good place to start when you're creating OER is there something out there that you could use that you don't have to write all of it yourself? That would be a good starting point. So putting this sourcebook URL here, I'm going to say, and actually, so this is a thing you can do with any book that is public, hold on, openly licensed and built on Pressbooks. I'm going to check that this is in fact, yes, it is openly licensed and it is public and built on Pressbooks. So I should be able to clone this with no problem. And so I just click clone it, and a few minutes later, I'm going to have an editable version in an interface that looks very similar to WordPress. I'm not sure if this is actually, in retrospect, the best book to have chosen, as it is a large book, but we'll see if it takes too long. If so, I'll pick a smaller book. But in general, you should be able to do things like delete chapters, add chapters, edit text, add contributors who may have contributed to the remix project, and all of those types of things. So this seems to be going well. Let's give it just a few moments. Okay, so it's going to give me a link, and now I can go into this book, and you'll see that everything has come over. So everything from, here's my dashboard for this book, everything from the authors for the book info, basically the metadata for the book should have come over. If there were individual, see, here are all the original contributors. Had there been, here's the original ISBN, original publisher, all of that came over. If there were chapter authors, they would come over. If there were attributions in media items like images, they would come over. If there were H5P exercises, they would also come over. And if I wanted to do different things inside of a chapter, all I would need to do is just go in. And again, this should look very much like you would see if you use WordPress for anything. Like the equivalent in Pressbooks to pages and posts in WordPress is parts and chapters. But so let's say I just cannot stand this paragraph. I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to resave. And I have begun to make my edits. If I wanted to, I could delete a chapter. Let's say this is less important for my context. You could localize a book with examples that make the most sense in your environment. I could start to add a chapter here. And of course, I would want to possibly credit this new chapter author. I might want to even, if I wanted to put a different license that's compatible with the book license on here, I could actually do that at the chapter level as well. And then I can just continue saving my changes and redistribute this book on my network to my students. Another thing I will show is just the basics of creating a book. So if I go to create a book, and I'm going to work on this privately. I could also make this public, but then make the individual chapters private while I'm working on it. Or I could make half the chapters public, and I could make some of them private while I'm working on it. So I could be conceivably working on a book all semester and releasing a chapter as each new week comes up in the modules. So here we have our starter book shell that is generated. And as I mentioned, Pressbooks works in parts and chapters within parts. It also has sections for front matter, things like your foreword or your introduction, and back matter, things like your glossary or appendix. And you can add parts and chapters very easily. So probably the first thing I do if I were setting up a new book is I would set up a structure for it maybe. And these could be thematic. You probably wouldn't call it, part 2 or something that literal. Maybe it would be a different section of thematic thing that you were talking about. But for the sake of our demo, I'll do this. And so I'll also start adding some chapters. And then if I want to, let's say I've done this and I'm starting to write and I'm like, I think that actually needs rearranged. I can actually move the chapters, or I could even have dragged and dropped that here. Just keep rearranging until I'm satisfied. And even after you've published a book, you can continue revising that book. There's probably a difference of preference in terms of whether you, at the end of a semester, for instance, if you've been using a book that you authored or remixed, you probably have some changes you want to make, and you could either do those to the existing shell that you've been working on and just revamp that for the next semester students, or you could actually use that cloning tool I showed you to make a clone of that same book on your same network for the next semester if you want to preserve a copy of the old changes. That is possible too. So that is the process of just creating these areas. Another thing you'll want to think about when you create a book is things like metadata. So you'll want to adjust the title. You'll want to make sure and credit all your contributors. And we've made it possible to credit contributors of all kinds because we know these projects involve so many people in different disciplines that's very important. The people you're crediting here do not need to be in Pressbooks. So they could be people that you are setting up the book for. They could also be people maybe a collaborator who just isn't in the Pressbooks instance. That is fine. You can still give them credit and attribution for their work. You would indicate the publisher and all of this, these ISBNs and DOIs. You would choose a webbook and ebook cover file. And then you would probably categorize the book. But the most important thing in the metadata is actually the copyright license, because Pressbooks uses this to determine whether or not a book can be cloned. So anything with a Creative Commons license that allows for derivatives that has told Pressbooks one of those licenses here will then be clonable by other Pressbooks EDU networks. So that is why this can be very important. And then when you're done, you would just save those changes. So let's pretend for a moment that we've set up a whole book and it's complete. You would probably want to change the look of the book. So here we have one theme. I could change it to another very easily. I just click activate, much like you would do in a WordPress blog. And this should apply a new theme. I can also change little things and customize it further without getting into the code under theme options. So here, I have a number of choices I can make, and the global options here apply to all the formats of the book. So the web book, the PDF, the EPUB, everything. And these are some sort of global options that you can designate. You might want to change the colors of these takeaway boxes, for instance. Web options apply to the web book, and there are many choices you could make here, and just each time go ahead and save. There are PDF options that apply to the print-on-demand formats, and those, probably the most important of these is the trim size. This, you might have, for instance, a 500-page book. You might want to make that a bigger trim size so that it's a smaller book when you print it, less thick. You could do a number of customizations if you really wanted to. Again, choosing things like how long is a widow or an orphan? What are the running heads or footers? What do those say? Things that would normally be a bit of effort to change. You can also make different choices on the ebook. And again, each time you just save those changes. You can make more custom modifications if you want to. We have basically made those user-friendly options for the most commonly asked for things, but if you really wanted to get into the custom CSS, you could do your own. For instance, a way to use this might be to change you might want to change a color, for instance, maybe in a certain area or on a certain element to match your university color, perhaps. things like that. I can see people getting into this, but it's not necessary. It's more like if you really want to go in there and make something that looks a little different, you can do that. And then when you're ready to preview or publish, you can go to the export screen. And here you can select which formats you want to export in. And whichever formats you choose here, if you have enabled them to show on the webbook homepage, these will show there. So actually, for instance, here we've enabled pretty much all of the options. And here we've enabled just a few of the options. And again, those choices are up to you. So let's say that I am just going to export one of these formats. I just want to preview what the EPUB looks like. So then I would press export, and then I'd be able to download the file from here and then take it wherever I might want to take it. A few things that are just on our Pressbooks EDU network are these 4 options. And this first of them is the common cartridge export with web links. And that will allow you to pull the book into your learning management system and use it as the spine of your course, but in a way where each chapter is essentially like an iframe embed. You are still going to bump people out to the external chapter possibly. These other 3 go with the more deep LTI integration, which allows you to seamlessly integrate with your learning management system. It breaks up the book, but also does a sync from Pressbooks to your learning management system that is instant, and it also allows you to sync a private book should you want to show, for instance, course materials that were copyrighted and you've made them on Pressbooks, but privately, you can actually deliver those through your learning management system with this integration. And it also keeps students thinking they are native in your Canvas or your Moodle instance or something like that, which is something that we hear sometimes people want to do. I'm going to show just a few of the more interactive features now and how to use those. So this is a demo book I've set up with a few elements already in it. And I know I showed you glossary terms just a bit ago, but I will show how to create those. So I've pre-populated this book with some glossary terms, and let's say, and this little checkbox determines whether Pressbooks will show this in the auto-populated glossary that you create. And I want it to do so, so I'm going to hit create. And now I have added a term to the glossary terms bank. I can also create these from within a chapter. So here we have a chapter that right now includes a glossary term. You'll notice there's a little code around this word, but I did not have to know this code or put this in. So if I wanted in Pressbooks to create a glossary term, all I need to do is highlight a term, click GL, and then I could either create and insert a term here and add a description, in which case it would again show up in my glossary terms, or I could choose an existing term here, which is what I'll do right now. And then I would save. And so now if I want to, first I'll show you what that looks like. So here we have that term. Now if I want to auto-populate the glossary, I would go back to my dashboard. And then I would add a piece of back matter. And I can call this anything. I'm just going to leave this blank. And then I'm going to tell Pressbooks that this is a glossary. And then I'll click create. And then Pressbooks took all those terms that I said, put them into the auto-populated glossary, and it included them, including this one here today. A few other things I can show. If you wanted to, for instance, add a video, I'm going just to the text editor. In Pressbooks, there are two ways to work. Much like in WordPress, you have your visual editor, which is more of like a what you see is what you get type of editor, and then you have your text editor where you can see the code. So here I'm just going in here to find the link for the video. And now going back to the visual editor, the only thing I need to do to make that video look like a video is copy paste the link to the YouTube video and then save. And then when I go to this chapter, the video appears. And the process is the same for the PhET simulations. And then on the EDU networks, you have a little more control. There are usually some designees called network managers, and they have control of a certain area of the network where if, for instance, you have a media storage place at your university like Kaltura or something that needs to be whitelisted because WordPress does not whitelist it by default and we don't whitelist it by default, you can change to whitelist that. Another example might be maybe you want to embed some NPR podcasts. NPR is not by default enabled or whitelisted, but you could go in and say, this is a source we trust. And once you do that as a network manager, anyone creating a book can then pull things, embed things from that source. A few other things that are fun to show. I will show you how to create, an H5P content. Okay, so I'm going to go to the H5P area, and you can enable this on a per book level. I'm going to add something new. Okay, get my notes here. And you can see there's about 40 different interactives that I have a choice to create using this tool inside of Pressbooks EDU. So I could do flashcards, a quiz, I could do charts, I could do presentations, drag the words, fill in the blanks, hotspots, all sorts of different interactive, interesting things, even a few little games. I could do a timeline this way as well. Speaking the words, that's an interesting possibility for language textbooks. You could do like a dictation, something kind of like a Duolingo type of a thing. You could do a virtual tour. So lots of possibilities. But today, for a live demo, I'm going to choose a simple one. And I'm just going to do a multiple choice quiz. And I hope this is true, but the internet told me this morning. Looking for a quiz question for this. This would go in the question area. Say, give people a few options here. And I am going to say that this is the correct option and create that. And then Pressbooks generates a shortcode. So when I go back into the book dashboard, I can add this anywhere I want, and that interactive will appear. So I could do this in the middle of a chapter with text around it. I'm just gonna, for simplicity, create a new chapter. I just copy and paste the shortcode and press create. And then when I go to that chapter, I can then take this quiz. So if I take this, you'll see that it shows that it's wrong. And if I do this, hold on. Here we go. It moved my options. There we go. So you can see there's, you can do some really fun things with this type of a tool inside Pressbooks. There are other things you could also embed, things like open assessments are another one that is a fairly cool interactive that could be added to Pressbooks. And then if you wanted to, if you had a book where this made sense, you could create tables fairly easily using this Table Press plugin. So I'm going to go to the table section and I'm going to add new. And what I like personally about Pressbooks is that none of this is terribly difficult and usually does not involve any sort of hard coding. Like I, as a person, really enjoy things where all I need to do is think about the content and it's really easy for me to create that content. So just staying in the table here. I'm going to say let's have 7 rows and 5 columns. I'm going to add a table. And then I can start adding my data. I can also do a variety of cool things to make the table prettier than it might otherwise be if I tried to create this in a hard-coded way. So I can say things like, treat this first row as a header, treat the last row as a footer. Let's alternate the background colors of rows, or let's highlight on hover. Let's put this table name above the table, maybe, nope, below the table, or I could show the table description in one of those places as well. I could get very fancy with CSS if I wanted to, but I probably wouldn't. I could say let the visitor sort the table, let them filter or search the table, enable them to paginate the table, or change the number of rows that they actually see when they're using that. This, or scrolling, if it's like a huge table with lots of columns, you might want to enable that. And then I just save the changes and the table makes itself. And again, this results in a short code that I can put anywhere in the book, and then it will show when I go to the web version. I'm just looking at my notes for a moment. Oh, one thing I should probably show is actually, do you mind if I pop out of this screen share and go into a different browser briefly? Does everyone see a Canvas window?
Yep, looks good.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is what I'm showing you right here is actually just a free version of Canvas. This is not like a institutional instance. This is something I set up myself. And I'll show you the sort of LMS, different ways to pull a text into the LMS. So when you take that export format, the Thing Common cartridge, either with web links or with LTI links, you would upload that into Canvas, and in this particular case, I will show you, it will break up the parts of the Pressbooks book into modules in Canvas, and then it will break up the chapters, will become pages in your Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard or any of those tools that you happen to use. The difference between the two ways to do this, either way, you can use this as the spine of your course. You could actually add things like high stakes, assignments, or maybe I wanted to add a quiz here in Canvas that gets graded in Canvas or something like that. But let's say you click on this chapter, you'll see that it's like an iframe embed. And you'll see that it is very clearly like inside of a box. It's clearly an embed. If I click on this, I'm going to accidentally go out of the learning management system into the book, which is probably fine for lots of scenarios. But some people want to keep students inside the interface at all costs. So the other option for this is the Thing Common cartridge with the LTI links. And when you pull that into Canvas and you connect Pressbooks and Canvas at the root level through your IT department can help make that connection. There's a key secret pair. Then when you upload a book from Pressbooks, from your Pressbook system into the connected learning management system, it's a lot more seamless. So for instance, I'm going to a chapter here. And you'll see that it looks much more as though I am inside of Canvas still. And this, for instance, is Canvas's navigation. At the root level, you have the option to mute Pressbooks navigation. And when you scroll down, you can do things that are, you will not only think, oh, I'm in this book, or I'm in this chapter is in Canvas, but you can do interactives that are in the chapter as well. So for instance, here is a H5P exercise. I can actually
Hey Liz, this is Leah. We're just seeing, or at least I'm just seeing a static screen with the courses, all courses
Shoot.
in Canvas, and I missed all your clicks. And I'm not sure why.
You know what? I see that it says I paused the screen share. I did not mean to pause.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that's better.
Okay, where do you think that paused for people? It's okay. You know what? I will just show you. I have a feeling it was green until...
We didn't see any of that. I didn't see any of this.
Okay, great. Okay, so probably you did not see me show you the web links either.
That's right. I didn't.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have been more like on the ball, but I just thought.
Thank you for telling me.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so at any rate, again, a shell of Canvas that I've set up myself. I don't have like root access to this like an IT person would have to truly connect it. But on this light thin common cartridge with web links option, if you go to a chapter, it looks like an iframe. It's very much like, here's a box with this like embedded content. And if I clicked on that external link, I would go to the external link in Pressbooks. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but some people are looking for something a little deeper, in which case the thin common cartridge exports with LTI links do something a little more. And basically, if you scroll down to a chapter, it's a little more seamless. So it's not like, hey, here's an obvious embedded iframe. It's more like you're in Canvas and you're still in Canvas or Moodle or whatever the case may be. And you can do the things in this Pressbook without really getting that, where am I going? Am I confused? Type of thing. So here is just, an exercise, and I can do that. That's an H5P exercise in Pressbooks coming through to Canvas, and I can actually do that here. If there were hypothesis annotations on this book, I could engage with them here. So lots of different possibilities, and I'm actually going to stop sharing the Firefox window. Hold on. Maybe that's where it all went wrong. But I will find, I'm going back to my comfort zone of Chrome. Okay. But that's basically all I would really share there. So I think I've been talking for a really long time, and that's a good place to pause and sort of take whatever questions people have. If there's anything you're curious about, or anything that's that has come up during this presentation, anything you're curious how to do, I'm glad to address those things. And again, Texas Digital Library offers a 30% discount on that, that many of those on this call are likely eligible for. I believe, Leah, do you want to speak to the exact membership qualification for that?
Yeah, you bet. So I can ascertain many of the people on this call, and some of the people who were on the call earlier are TDL members or part of TDL member institutions. And so with that, there's no pass-through. You don't have to work with TDL. If you're interested, you can reach out to Liz directly or reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with Liz.
And I would be glad to talk with anyone, your department, anyone you'd like me to talk with on individual calls after this call.
We have another question. This is from Alexa. If faculty are curious about cloning books to adapt, is there a central list or database for them to look at Pressbooks books? You showed some examples of various networks.
Right, so that's something we're actually working on right now. I don't have an exact ETA for that, but yes, we are working to surface a directory that it would make it much easier to find, as well as clone, possibly in bulk, a set of Pressbooks books that would make sense for your institution. In the meantime, the two options I showed are probably the next best thing. I really like the OTN library has a number of books built on Pressbooks. The BC Campus Open Textbook search is extremely comprehensive of a lot of the OER that's out there. There's eCampus Ontario has a good find a book tool as well. And generally, when you're a client, we also have a community for the network managers on a network. So usually there's 3 to 5 people at your institution who are essentially the contacts for Pressbooks, and we work really closely for you to ensure that your program sees success on Pressbooks and that you have what you need from the platform and to support your program. And there's also a way where you can ask questions of others. So a question I've seen come across is, is anyone working on an adaptation of X? Or has anyone seen a book on this subject lately? I'm looking for something that could, those kinds of questions are things you can ask not only of us in the client context, but also of other Pressbooks EDU users.
And just a quick follow-up there, Liz, that is a listserv. Is that what you mentioned? That's in Listserv?
Yeah, it's more of a forum. So we have Pressbooks is open source. I'm sure people have heard that. But so we have a forum, and many of our open source users have a variety of code questions that come across on that forum, like how do I do this, or that kind of thing, asking questions of other users. We use that same forum, but we use a private area of that's exclusive to our clients, where our clients can ask questions that are more like, how are you using Pressbooks in your OER program or initiative? How are you dealing with this aspect, for instance? And some of which are Pressbooks-centric questions, and some of which are maybe not. They're more like OER initiative types of questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
I guess I know this is primarily faculty, so I don't want to take too much time with this, but also on your network for the network managers, there are special areas of particular interest that come with the educational network, things such as analytics, network analytics, so you can kind of gauge the usage of your network. You can see, what books are taking up the most use, who are the power users, should I reach out and offer them different support, for instance. There is also an area where you can, as a network manager, you can do a lot of really powerful things in terms of filtering the content that's created. For instance, you might say, what are the public books on my network? And what that might indicate that they're done, for instance, or what are the clonable books on my network? What languages are using this, which language departments are using it? What are the subjects most common on the network? Maybe a certain department could use some bolstering or support if they're already sort of first adopters. You can see the size and storage. So for instance, an 81-word book is probably just a test book, but a 50,000-word book might be an indication a book is nearing completion. You might want to, let the university PR office know to start talking about it. You can see different themes. What are the most popular themes? You could see if someone's produced exports or allows downloads of exports, which would most likely at that point, that is a book in use. You could see which types of exports are being used. And you could even download a CSV of the books, which could be helpful for different reasons. Likewise, for users, you could download a CSV, which might be a way to say, okay, we are going to contact the people who have decided to use Pressbooks and see what kinds of support we can offer for their open textbook projects. Different universities authorize people differently. So you could, if you wanted to, just say, anyone with an email domain from who's an affiliate of our university and therefore has our email domain suffix, they can simply create an account on their own. You could also say anyone who wants to create an account needs to contact us in a Google form or something, and we will grant permission and authorize them manually. And that way we'll know, who are these people using it and what are they doing, and we can keep in touch. So different ways to do that. You could also see people who are doing lots of books or who have a role greater than different access codes and just a variety of different things that might be useful in that way.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and this might be new, Leah. I don't think you've seen this before. This is pretty, so yeah.
Yeah, that's great. A couple more questions came in, and do we still have time? Are we good on time? Yeah, we're close, but we're good. So we have a question from Bruce. Are there plans available if an individual faculty member wants to use Pressbooks for a single OER?
Yeah, so we do have a network that is more designed for individual authors, like self-publishing authors, indie authors. That's at pressbooks.com, and you can create an individual book there. The difference is that it will not include the educational features, or most of the educational features. And it will not include things like the training or the support that would come with the institutional package.
And just a follow-up question there, Liz. My guess is that, so my understanding is that TDL members get the 30% discount with Pressbooks EDU, and this other network that you're talking of would not be eligible for that. Is that correct?
No, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, good to know. One more question from Brian. How do you manage peer review?
Right. So that is really a question for the institution, and every institution handles that differently. You could do that. I have seen people do it prior to even putting the book into Pressbooks. I've seen people, export a certain format of the book and hand it off to the peer reviewers and say, let us know your feedback in an email or something. I've seen people use Hypothesis set up a private group in Hypothesis and say, give us your feedback in Hypothesis. Lots of ways you could do that, but we take no position on. Basically, we don't tell you how to license your book. We don't tell you how to peer review your book. We are like generally at universities nowadays, there is somebody sort of tasked with answering those questions. Often in the libraries, but not always.
Another follow-up question that I have to Brian's peer review question: is there a workflow tool within Pressbooks for that, or is that managed outside of Pressbooks in the way that you're kind of talking about? The library has its own kind of external workflow for managing peer review.
You could definitely do it at any stage. Like you could do it once the book is in Pressbooks, but it would probably happen outside of Pressbooks if you're using that Hypothesis method. So possibly with, for instance, like let's pretend we are creating, let's pretend we're peer reviewing this bookshelf. Like I could export the book in any format and just say, hey, peer reviewers, here are all the ways you could read a draft of this book, and then just like manually get me your feedback. I could also, for instance, make the book public and then set up a private layer for the peer review. These are all private layers I'm showing you right here. And I have done this with a book, and it works just fine if you have people who want to do peer review in a more digital way. You may also have people who are peer reviewing, like you can work in different programs like Google Docs before you ever pull anything into Pressbooks. You don't have to work in Pressbooks. You can also import like a Word doc. So if you're working in Google Docs and you export as a Word doc, maybe the peer review happens in the Google Doc side prior, or the editing and that kind of a thing. So we don't dictate a workflow. Those are the ones I'd suggest, but it's not prescriptive.
That makes a lot of sense. And maybe you did mention this earlier, but since many materials would be created with people both internal and external to the organization, is there any issue with having external collaborators access the book and work in there?
So generally when you do an institutional plan, it's for users at your institution in terms of who is creating and authoring content. However, so broadly it's for your institution's users, but in a case where you have like, a 20-person collaboration with 15 professors from your department and a few at other universities, that you're bringing into the project or something, or maybe they're peer reviewers, like we don't really prevent that. It's just that broadly for creation, the creation aspect is for your own faculty at your institution. But no, we wouldn't prevent you from having peer reviewers or something from another, or the occasional collaborator from another institution.
Okay, thanks. I guess if there are no further questions, what's going to happen next is we're going to caption this video and publish it on YouTube so that you can share it out with your faculty. And I'll send an email out to everyone with a link to that video. And in the meantime, if any questions come up, whether it's about the use of Pressbooks or to get started with the Pressbooks membership, please feel free to reach out to me or Liz, and we'll be happy to get you started.
For sure. And I guess I should give people my email. It's Liz. It's Liz at Pressbooks.com. Super easy to remember. You can also email sales@Pressbooks.com and you will inevitably reach me. So either of those two options, I'd love to hear from you.
Great. And for all you faculty who are still here, we should have said this first. Please make sure to mention to your libraries that you are interested in using Pressbooks. If they don't hear from you, they might not know that there's an interest out there. So spread the word and be sure to talk to your ScholComm folks at libraries.